All right. So the question is about anapanasati and kaya nupassana, or mindfulness of the body, or investigation of the body. Most specifically, calming the body formations. Okay. First off, let's look at the word bodily formations. The word formation here is a translation of the Pali word that is Sankhara, and that in other suttas, like especially Sutta number 9, called Right View, which is a deep, deep, beautiful exposition of Paticca Samuppada. This is actually taught by Sariputta, and that in the part of the description of the Sankhara, uh, he mentions that there are three kinds of Sankhara: bodily Sankhara, verbal Sankhara, and Sita Sankhara. And the Sita Sankhara is kind of strange because the translators translated always as mind, uh, and that by translating Sita always as mind, it makes things a little confusing because the word Sita in the Pali has more than one meaning. And in this case, what we're talking about is more of the emotional part of the mind rather than the frontal cortex. So be careful that we're knowing that, because the frontal cortex, in fact, is not um, so much a mental formation as that the frontal cortex, or the human brain, uh, the way that it's constructed, the things that only humans can do are done with that part of the brain. But all of the stuff that any animals can do, we do with other parts of the brain that the animals have. And in that regard, there's actually a Pali word for that frontal cortex that has the word mana in it, or manut. That in fact, in the Pali, the word in the Thai language, the word manut, they borrowed that, and you can hear the word man in the sense of human, mankind, those kinds of words.
So just to recap a little bit, so you're saying there's three forms of Sankara, and like that's going to be what emotional, body, and verbal. And
Right.
these are the things that are going to be active, I guess. Like these are going to be not calm, and then there's a process
Right.
of like calming the Sankara.
Exactly. Exactly. And what we mean by that word sankara is not only old form things, but also the forming things. And so the word formation doesn't quite do justice to it, in the sense that we concocted and then stored, but then we continue to concoct with both the stuff that we previously concocted and new stuff as it comes along.
Hmm.
Ah, so let's see, how do I do this? Miles Tupton has just wanted to join here. Let's see if I can.
Let's chat, okay? No, let's don't. I'm not here to talk now. I'm here.
Wow, that's noisy.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I don't see it. Never mind. Okay, so back to the formations. Um, these bodily sankharas then uh, can be seen as things that have been stored away, as well as permanent things. An example would be then a musician has bodily sankharas that another musician doesn't have, or that or ordinary people that don't play music, they don't have those skills. Sports skills. The ability to catch a fish flying through the air would be a skill, and that's part of the bodily formations. But if you also recognize that everyone has bodily formations that, let us say, actions that are unnecessary. An example of that would be fidgeting. And surprisingly enough, there are places where people go together to collect together in groups, and their primary activity in that group is fidgeting. Let me give you two examples of such a place. One would be a doctor's office where people are waiting to see the doctor, and everybody is sitting there nervous and fidgeting. Some people are twiddling their thumbs. Other people are wrapping their thumbs on the chair, their fingers. Other people are wiggling their legs and things like that. Another example would be at the bus station where people are waiting for the bus, but they're agitated and fidgety. In fact, when people are traveling, that's the time that we become agitated. And why are we agitated is because of the fear of the unknown, and there's always fears of the unknown when we're traveling until we get used to traveling over and over again, especially if it's the same route. Or the same thing is true about going to the doctor, that people are nervous and upset when they go to the doctor. So while they're in the waiting room, they're going to show that nervousness and that anxiety in bodily movements. This is the kind of stuff that then we can start to become aware of, is external bodily movements that are unnecessary and actually is a demonstration of that we're not at peace inside, and it's also a trigger to keep us continuously agitated. So
So,
go ahead.
so that fidgeting, so I've noticed like when I sit down and say I'm nervous of something, there's a lot of like internal like fidgeting, a lot of movement, maybe in the chest area or in like the neck area or in the back or something like that. And if I'm able to, I don't know, be aware at the point of contact or be able to like have the right, I forget the right terminology, but like have the right mindset so that those subside and rest, then that fidgeting kind of decreases. Is that kind of the calming and the fidgeting you're talking about, or am I off base
Yes,
there?
that's also one of the examples then would be of calming the bodily formations would mean then to allow the tension in the body to subside. That in
Okay.
fact, it is quite common for people who are practicing various forms of meditation to complain about headaches. And they have the headaches when they're meditating. Surprise, surprise. Why is that? Is because they're actually in their meditation, creating tension rather than noting it and allowing it to subside.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And because they're creating tensions, especially in the shoulders and the back of the neck and places around like here, that actually then um, puts on the tension, causes the blood to slow down. So basically, what these tension headaches are is basically a differential in the blood pressure between the blood pressure in the head and the blood pressure in the rest of the body, because the veins, the jugular vein, is kind of closed off because of the weight of the tension, and then the blood goes through the arteries, gets into the head. People even talk about, I have a pounding headache. That pounding headache is a guarantee that that's a tension headache, and they've gotten themselves tensed up, and therefore the blood is flowing incorrectly, and that pounding is actually their heartbeat.
Ooh, that
And
makes a lot of sense. And so this would be like a form of Sankhara, like that. Would that be like what I guess that would be bodily, and then I guess it all kind of
right.
mixes together, so it could lead to
So you could
emotional
say that
or
it's a combination of old tension and newly formed tension being formed by the old habit that formed it in the first place.
Is tension a good synonym for Sankhara, or is that
What's a
not?
synonym for
Is
Sankhara?
tension a good way of like describing Sankhara?
Actually, Sankhara is larger than that.
Okay, so it's like
But
a
you
small
could
part.
use tension as a subset of Sankhara.
Hmm.
That's one example of Sankhara or formations. Skills, some skills are also bodily formations. The way that a professional baseball pitcher holds and throws a ball is different than the way that a 5-year-old boy picks up a baseball the first time and throws it. Okay? The skill that that professional baseball player has gained is because he's done it over and over and over again, refining his skills over and over and over again. We all have the ability to throw a baseball, but some of us can throw it 10 feet and others can throw it at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, like a professional baseball player or like a violinist, they're kind of bringing about that formation that causes the violin to be like played or that baseball to be thrown in a certain way. And that's going to be a combination of like those three sankharas.
Well, mostly though it's the bodily training. That's the
Mostly the
thing that a
bodily
lot
training,
of
yeah.
people do not understand about music is that there are two kinds of music. There is body music, and then there is intellectual music. And you could go so far as to say that classical music grew up in the way of taking bodily music and putting it into an intellectual format.
Mhm.
What is body music? Drumming. You go. Have you ever been to a drum meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, they have them in Santa Cruz and in other places like that, where everybody knows there's a drum meeting. They just bring whatever that they can bang on, and they just have a lot of fun banging on stuff, right? Well, you can take that one step further and say then that that's the drums that the primitive tribe would have on a full moon night or something like that when they're out there drumming, African drumming. Then, in fact, the African drumming, I found out when I was studying music in college. Uh, Somebody keeps sending me messages, and I don't know how to send the link to this call to say, please join the call. Does anybody have a link?
I can post the link in the chat if you'd like to send it to them. So
Yeah, post the link of this in the chat,
you might be able to copy that and send it to them.
and I'll copy it and send it to them. Right.
I think a word often used for bodily sankhara is muscle memory.
Muscle memory. Ah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
So I guess like there's going to be a muscle memory associated with being like calm and happy. And so if that arises, then I guess like you would feel those things. Is that, I guess I kind of said that poorly, but
Yeah, I think like
would that make
a
sense?
calming of the body could be put into muscle memory. It could be made as a habit. Just like fidgeting could, right?
Yeah, that seems like makes sense to me. So like, yeah, you could recall that.
Or like taking a deep breath could be muscle memory habit, or where like fidgeting could be a response to anxiety. The deep breath could be a response to like sati or waking up.
I think we also have it for mental and emotional events too. You know, like or in a mental way. Like for example, one thing I do is when I feel restlessness, I'll start reading the news for some reason, which would make me
True,
more anxious. You know,
Go to Twitter.
yeah, it's like mental version of smoking cigarettes. You know, that cigarette only only sates the nicotine addiction, which by extending it, satiates it by extending it. It's the same with news, social media.
Okay. So, knowing this is a foundation, when we start talking about it in the sense of the Dhamma, what the calming of the bodily formations mean is that we begin to pay attention to the movements of the body that would be kind of automatic, so that we take control of the body, just like we're taking control of the breathing. Just because we're taking control of the breathing, that means that we're already beginning to take control of the body. And so we begin to notice the body's movements. And we begin to also, when we're intentionally moving the body, to really pay attention to what we're doing. So reaching, grabbing, stretching the arms, any kind of movement for picking up something, we begin to notice the body's movements. Also, any fidgeting that you have. That in fact, this is what part of the idea then is when people call it meditation. You know, everybody's idea of what meditation is. This is one point in time when they're practicing the calming of the body formations, because the students are told to sit still, to not move their hands, to not move their legs, to keep the eyes closed, that you occasionally straighten the back, but other than that, you're holding the body still. And we begin to control the body that way. Now, there is a rule in the Patty Mork about arms akimbo is the translation, and that there is two different translations of the word arms akimbo that I know. One of them is hands on the hip with your fist balled up and you're standing like this. Okay, an aggressive stance. And that aggressive stance is almost always done subconsciously. The only time that that kind of stance is done consciously is when you're playing with it. When it's a toy, when we're having a game. But when it's done unconsciously, it's a sign of aggression, and people are feeling angry. There's another word used for the word arms akimbo in the sense that the arms are flailing about. This is especially true when, let us say, monks are walking around. When they're walking around, there's ordinary people, they do whatever they want to with their arms while they're walking around. Some people will swing them. There's all kinds of movements. But generally, the monks are either out and about on Pendabat, or they're on a long walkabout on a tudong. And in both cases, they're going to have stuff that they've got to carry, like the bowl. That in fact, I've got a really interesting story about that. That for the carrying of the bowl, when you're out on tudong or when you're on walkabout, let us say that in those days, there was a lot of tudong in 1980s between Bangkok and South Thailand. The monks would go pilgrimage, but they'd walk down to see Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And that was in the days before there was a major highway. And so there's a lot of back paths, and the monks would know all of these back paths. And so they're walking, but they're carrying a bunch of stuff. And then the other time is when they're out on Pendabat, when they're carrying the bowl. Now, the bowl bag is used for the tudong, out when they're walking long distances. But when they're doing Pendabat, the idea is that you don't take the bowl bag, that you only carry the bowl. And then you manipulate the lid with your left hand while you're carrying the bowl with your right hand. And then then Achan Po gives me an umbrella to carry during the monsoon. So now I've got an umbrella, and the bowl lid that I've got to manipulate while I'm carrying and holding the umbrella in the same hand. And so the idea that I got is that, well, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to get a very small wire, and I actually cut tiny little holes in the very top limb of the bowl so that I could put this wire and I could loop it around. Actually, it was more of a string, but the point is that as soon as I showed up for Bentabat, I didn't get to even walk one more step after Achan Po saw that bowl with that little wire striped around to give me, no, this is training. And we stood there right then, and I had to take that string off that bowl, and so that I had to carry it with the hand and the bowl lid and um, the umbrella. There's also the occasion to carry the yam bag, which is, you've seen monks with these yam bags, but you have to carry that also in a certain way. That part of the arms of Kimbo is that you cannot put the shoulder bag on the shoulder. It's not a shoulder bag. It's a forearm bag. It has to be carried here, or in the case when we're on Bendabat, it's carried on the right arm, draped over this way. So now you've got a bag here that people can put food in, like bananas and apples and plastic bags of liquid stuff. They can put that in the yam bag and put rice and other things ready to eat in the bowl. So you've got the yam bag, you've got the bowl, you've got the lid that you have to open and close, and sometimes turn it over so people can put piled stuff on in that lid as well, and then balance that on the bowl, and carry an umbrella, and watch where you're going barefoot.
So what are
And
the
go ahead.
so with all these trainings, what's the purpose of it? Is it to learn how to be happy in different like physical situations,
Well,
or
in
is it
this
just
particular case, look at what you're doing.
mhm.
This is a wake-up call. This is this is mindfulness training.
Mhm.
This is watching what you're doing, because you got to manipulate that umbrella basically with every step. You got to
Who, so
really
this is
watch, and
paying attention to what's there. Yeah.
yeah, you got to watch that umbrella. You got to watch that lid. You got to watch the bowl. You got to watch the yarn bag. You got to watch everything. You got to watch every step, because you're going barefoot. And not only that, but Achan Po is going to lead you into briars, brambles, um, gravel streets.
Okay, yeah, so
So
it's like
after
new
you've got,
experiences. It's like it's seeing how you respond to like all these different situations.
and then you have to go through literally a minefield.
Literally a minefield.
Little a minefield, because if
Oof.
you step on a bramble, it's like stepping on an IUD.
Oh no.
All right, so this is part of the training of the body. So that in fact, what we're doing is that in some ways we're adding new sankharas, but these are new sankharas that are skills,
Hmm.
as opposed to the old sankharas, which just built up over time mindlessly. So we begin to bring everything, all of the mindless movements, into mindful movements, so that we're beginning to develop the skill of uh, basically calming these bodily formations, especially the ignorant ones. Wiggling one's foot, uh, like you crossing your legs at the ankles, and then having one foot go bounce, 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 bounce. You guys have all done this. Also holding your hands, and then we twiddle thumbs and twiddle thumbs. You guys have done this, okay? Extraneous movements that are unnecessary. And if, let us say, if you're reading a book, surprise, surprise, most of the hand movements then will be in concerned with holding the book, and there's just enough mindfulness while you're reading the book that basically you're kind of sitting still. But little kids, when they're learning to read, you can see that they're quite agitated. So these calming the bodily formations, you could say, is calming tension, calming agitation, and bringing the body down to a place of rest or peace, which is what they're practicing when they're sitting for long periods of time. They're actually practicing holding the body still. However, that doesn't solve the issue of the stress or the tensions. That just keeps the bodily movements down because they can still stress themselves. Now, one of the things that is actually not a bad idea to do if you've got a tension headache or if you've given yourself a headache during meditation is to go ahead and massage those muscles with your hands. Allow these muscles to loosen up and relax a bit in the back if you've got a headache. That's very surprising. Give yourself a neck rub to remove a headache. Hello, Edward.
Hello.
Hello, guys.
Good to see you.
Hey, great to see you.
Hi.
Okay, so Edward, we've been talking about bodily formations
hmm
and the various kinds of bodily formations, but there are basically two kinds of bodily formations. Those bodily formations that were formed ignorantly, and those formations that were formed skillfully, intentionally. For instance, learning to play music or learning to play a particular sport is a skill that we've developed, but that a lot of our physical bodily movements are done unskillfully. Agitation, shaking the leg, drumming the fingers. All of this is done what they call absent-mindedly, which means that the body is kind of doing this stuff by itself. And that it's done partly because of the anterior cortex of the brain, which is what actually controls the bodily movements. All of this stuff is happening in the back. And that what we want to do then is to wake up the front so that we can get some guidance rather than having all of these bodily movements. And so when the monks are walking occasionally with only the yam bag, which we do in ceremonies and other things like that, then one of the ways of walking is to make sure that the yam bag itself is not a Kimbo. It's not swinging around, that you hold the yam bag in such a way that it doesn't move. And yet you're only holding it from the top area of it, and the bag itself is down below. So you hold it close so that it doesn't swing around. Another item that would be very interesting, and this is something to experiment with. It has to do originally for the monks with not touching women, but it gets a little bit more interesting than that in the sense of in some Watts and in some places, on some occasions, there's a lot of people, especially if there's big ceremonies and they have monks from all over the place, and then all the people come. And then the monk trying to get to the bathroom, for instance, when he has to go through the kitchen, it's really a minefield. And that the way that I had to practice is that you're not going to maneuver and push your way through a crowd. That the monk will just stand there, pointing himself in the direction that he's intending to go, and he waits for the women and the men and the children and everyone who is blocking his path to move out of the way for him so that he can move through there without touching anyone. The Asians know this because of centuries of this behavior. Westerners don't have a clue. And all they see is a monk standing there. Why is the monk standing there? He's standing there because he's waiting for you to get out of his way. and you don't even know that. And so this was something that was dealt with on occasion. But generally, what will happen in those kinds of situations is that some Thai or Asian who is there and sees what's going on will grab this guy by the arm and push him out of the way, or tell him, please move aside or something like that, so the monks can go through. Now that really tests the monk's intentions. So this is actually a good practice for you. That if you're wanting to go through an area that has people in it, that you have to plan your path very carefully, a little bit at the time, so that you don't touch anyone. Imagine yourself going down the street in New York and not touching anyone, and not being there and available for other people to touch you, and yet you can still walk down the street. This is a skill to be developed, and it especially has to do with not having the arms out and moving around, or trying to move people out of the way, or doing any of that stuff. You just stand there.
You know, here in Sweden, we are very cautious of our personal space. You know, it's a very cultural thing. We grew up taking little bit.
That's right. It is a cultural issue.
Yeah.
And that how much social distance there is. One of the things that I know for sure about India more than any place else is that they have no consciousness about social distancing.
So
There's so many of them there, and they're in each other's face all the time. And so just to talk to you, he's going to be right here. You know, you have to refocus your eyes because the Indians are going to be right in your face.
yeah,
And so
very interesting. I used to do I do one thing when I'm in the store. I always, you know, I practice one thing here in Sweden in the store. I give up my queue place to other people that are stressed. So when I'm gonna pay, you know, for food, when I see someone come very stressed, I'm always offering their place, and I'm offering their place. I'm offering their place until someone says, "No, you can do it first." And sometimes it takes a while before somebody else gives me my, you know, gives me to, to finally do my grocery. You know, that's one thing I do. Do you think it's a good idea? Or?
you're breaking up, and it's really a bit difficult for me to hear. One of the things that I'm picking up from you is that um, you're looking at it from the other direction of how people will stay out of each other's way,
Hmm.
so that that if someone like the monk is coming, the lay people know to get out of his way. But the important thing is that the monk knows that he's not going to maneuver his way through a crowd of people.
Hmm.
That he's not going to do that. He's not going to put himself in the position of being within 3 feet of anyone.
And so that'll be highlighting their intention. It'll be more clear, like when they have this very, like, I guess, like very like simple objective. And so they'll be able to kind of like see what's going on in their body more clearly. Is that part of it?
Absolutely, as well as watching your attention. So when the monk is around a lot of people, and you don't have to actually be in the orange robes to start practicing this, but that when you're out in public, you don't make any movements. You stand, you walk correctly, and you don't push people out of the way to get where you're wanting. If people are in the way, you just stand and stop and wait for them to move out of the way. There's one occasion I remember that I was at a Vietnamese temple in Boston. Got a lot of photographs of that time where there was huge numbers of monks and whatnot. And naturally, time to go to the bathroom. So here I am going to the bathroom, and I've got to go through the kitchen, and the kitchen was just filled with women. They all move out of the way slowly, Westerners and Asians there. And then I get to the hallway where the bathroom is there, and guess what? There's about 12 girls, a dozen girls or so, all little girls, aged from whatnot, children up to teenage, and they're all sitting on the floor, and they've got the whole floor completely covered with human bodies. But
So this is kind of
they don't.
like the walking through the minefield thing you were going to talk about. Like you have this intention, like I'm not going to touch anybody, and then it's just like very difficult due to like your environment and your surroundings.
Right,
And it's
because
about like maintaining that and
there's no
like
place to
understand.
put a foot. There's no place to put a foot. So just
Yeah.
standing there and within, let us say, longer than I was hoping, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and some elderly Asian woman actually got all of those kids to get up and get out of the hallway so that the monk can go to the bathroom.
Yeah. So if I think back to like I guess maybe a kind of comparable example is like if I go on a walk and I'm absent-minded, I'm gonna feel maybe grumpy or like agitated or be ruminating over things that have happened through the day. But if I wake up and I'm trying to pay attention and like have the clear objective of like I want to have a nice walk down the road, and start correcting my body posture and things like that to be more in line with that intent. Well, I guess like you're just kind of bringing that awareness in. You're like bringing that awareness into like kind of the daily activity, not to the extreme of what you're talking about, but it's all about just kind of seeing what's going on like within your body and your mind and your emotions. Is that kind of the goal?
Yes. And so you could see that, especially for a middle-aged man who is a new monk, learning to maneuver that is quite difficult. This is one of the reasons why, in general, new monks do not go out in public. They don't go for celebrations and funerals and all of that. That for more than 2 years at Wat Choin Mok, and I never went out. But when I was in the United States, any opportunity to go out, and I had to go out with them. That in fact, one point is that there was not enough monks to go around in this area, which was mostly North Carolina, into Virginia, down into South Carolina. There was not enough monks to go around for the number of old retirees that had been refugees, gone through the Vietnam War, gone through all the carpet bombings and everything, into the refugee camps, and then they come to the United States, get old, and die. Too many of them were getting too old and die, but we had also other situations. There was one situation to where there was some gang group stuff, to where the Laotian boys and the Vietnamese boys got actually into heavy duty gang warfare. And I think altogether, I think that there was 4 Lao and 2 Vietnamese boys killed in this street fight in Charlotte. This is back in 2005, 2006, something like that. And what happened is that both sides, all of the Vietnamese uh, people in the city went to the Lao funerals, and the Lao went to the Vietnamese funerals, and they had both funerals. All the Lao boys in one funeral and all the Vietnamese boys in another funeral, all on the same day, and it was all the same people. But we did have a lot of funerals, and so to have funerals, that means that all the monks had to go on duty. I remember that it was Mahasamsak, because of his excellent language skills. He was really an excellent with language. He had good English. He knew Khmer. He could speak the difference between the Thai and the Lao. And so he was kind of the coordinator for these funerals, which didn't do us, the people who were living with him, any good because we always were coordinated. So any funeral that he had anything to do with, his guys had to go to it. I remember one that we had to split our team up to where half of us had to go to Asheville while the others were going to the other side of the state. And so Uh, when I was in the United States, there was a lot of opportunity to be around lay people, to where when I was in Thailand, I could stay a monk all the time and just stay in the Wat because my services were not requested or needed. So it was there in the United States that these practices had to be done, but I had been a monk now long enough that I knew what needed to be done without having to be told. And so,
And I guess like what needed to be done there was how to like skillfully navigate these
skillfully
crowds.
navigated in a crowd, exactly.
And yeah, with the I guess like through the funerals and just be skillful about it as opposed to like me if I went, I'd probably be worried about a million things and just like nervous about the situation as opposed to being present.
Right. But the monks, the whole job then in those situations is to be here now, to be present, to look at what you're doing, watch what you're doing with your hands, watch what you're doing with your feet. Uh, this is, it's actually quite excellent training. And so I would recommend for each of you to start thinking about that. How do you deal with other people physically that you're just in the area or the vicinity of them, but you don't have really any, in fact, you don't want to have any contact with you. You're out in public, you're in a crowd, you're in a Wat that's got people you don't know and people you do and that kind of stuff. And so that's the point of time to really be mindful of what your body is doing. So these are the calming of the bodily formations then. Uh, to to be aware of the hand movements, to be aware of the feet movements, to be aware of the face movements. Uh, this is all part of the training that the monks go through that Westerners in general don't understand. So when they hear things like uh, calming the bodily formations, it sounds kind of weird, but now you're getting this is exactly how it's done is by not moving so much. Or more importantly, that if you are going to pick up something, to slow down your movements. Don't grab things. Uh, we learn to grab things when we're kids. Kids grab things from each other on a regular basis, quick grab, just grab things like that. So now we're going to do our picking things up mindfully.
Question.
Yes.
So one thing I've wondered about is the dividing line between mindfulness and anxiety, because I can see the two being related. I could see it being an anxious sort of a situation if you're walking through a crowd and trying not to touch anyone. I could see one response to that might be anxiety. So how would you distinguish between the two? What's kind of the border? Because I could definitely see. You could even say, could you maybe even argue that anxiety is also a state of high sati? It's just sati charged with negativity. It's like a
Yes,
negative version of sati.
that's
Um,
exactly right. Okay, so right. But your anxiety is coming from fear of doing something wrong. But the example is waiting for that group of children and teenage girls to get up off the floor so that I could go to the bathroom. That was not anxiety producing at all. That was mastery, and that it needs to be discussed a little bit in a way that in Thailand, uh, the the whole society and the monks are taught in a certain way that the monks are the highest class people in the country. There is only one person who is a layman who outshines the monks, and that's the king. So you have as social status king, all the monks in all of their stratas, and then you have aristocracy, and then you have government people, and then you have ordinary farmers. That's the strata. In the West, that's not true. That in fact, preachers have no status in many places in the United States, and in other places, preachers have very high status. You can tell which places they are because of which preachers become politicians, like Huckabee. Wherever Huckabee came from, I think it's Arkansas, you can say that that's one of the places where religious leaders have very high status in the community, but in other places they don't. Well, in Thailand, there's that certain status that monks have. And so that's the status then that uh, that in that situation where I'm waiting for all of those children, all those girls to move out of the way, I'm doing that not from, oh, I'm anxious and I've got to get to the bathroom. It's no, I'm the lion here. This is expected. This is the way the culture works. This is a monk. You got to be the monk. You got to be in charge of this situation. You're just going to stand there firmly and just wait for those people to get out of your way. Even though it takes a whole lot more seconds than you want it to take. And it's not a matter of anxiety, it's a matter of power. And that's an important part because you can see that that's part of that Sama Sankappa, that the monks in Thailand are trained to be not feeling egotistically better, but whether they're in the station of having to be better. Okay, that you're
So,
better than ordinary people, that you're above that. You've got to be noble. It's the requirement here.
there's no other choice.
Pardon?
There's no other choice.
Yeah, there's no other choice other than disgrace.
Sure, or dukkha.
Yes, disgrace and dukkha would be the options, but the correct way to do it is that um, oh, here's an example. Robert De Niro is in a movie. He is playing the part of, let us say, the biggest, meanest, baddest gangster in town, and that's the movie part that he's playing. While he's on stage and while he's in the movie, he's got to be that character all the time. He cannot revert to being Robert De Niro while he's on the set. This is what they call by method acting, that you've got to become that part. Um, Alex Baldwin, I think, is the guy who does it. By the way, it doesn't quite do that when he is on Saturday Night Live being Donald Trump. He's not being Donald Trump, he's being a character of Donald Trump. But I think that you guys know the difference with what we're talking about. That when you're a monk, you've got to be a monk. You've got to act like one. And not only that, but you take the benefits of that station. This is kind of, this is a topic that really isn't discussed very much, but it's part of the training of being the monk. Without even understanding the benefits. In other words, when I'm out with Achan Po and he kind of moves his arm just a little bit, just a small gesture to say, don't do what you're about to do. I learned that from him very early. I think that I mentioned this one time that several weeks ago on the screen porch, on the screen door or window, a yellow jacket was trying to get out. It was trapped in the room. A yellow jacket that I had not seen the size of in so long. This yellow jacket was good 2 inches. It was about like this. When Tam saw the yellow jacket, she was afraid. She saw this guy's dangerous. Because if yellow jackets sting, this guy is yellow jacket on steroids. They have those kind of animals in Thailand. Well, I had seen that kind of yellow jacket or wasp before, and where I had seen it was it while I was standing, let us say, in the shade by the side of the gravel road at Watso and Moke, and one of these big dudes lands on Achan Po's head. And he continues to talk with me while that big wasp is on his head, and it starts to crawl down towards his left eye. And when it had gotten down to the eyebrow, that's when I made my move. But my move was only about 3 inches. Just as my hand started to come up, that's when I tried. He was waiting for me to do something. He was testing me. But to show the strength of mind that he had to put me through the test with the bug on him, not on me. And so that's that slight little gesture that became his hallmark for me. That all he had to do was just move his hand just a few inches. Was the way that he would gesture or things like this to masterful. Another quality that I saw in Achan Po was that because his English was not very good, he did talk in Thai a lot, but the way that he dealt with me was almost always with one-liners. It was like if you couldn't teach me the Dhamma in three words, there was no Dhamma to teach at all. And so the kind of language that he would use would be not sure, which is actually a major part of the teachings of the Buddha, to be not sure and to be happily not sure, because that goes against the fear of the unknown and all kinds of other stuff. But ultimately, in fact, you probably heard of the 10 fetters, and the highest fetter, the top dude, the last one on the list is ignorance, right? Okay, you have the top five, the higher five would be Arupa Raga and Rupa Raga. Then you would have, which has to do with fear of existence and non-existence. Then you have restlessness. You have mana or comparisons or ego in the sense of competition. And then the last one on the list is ignorance. And what we mean by that last one on the list is that learning to be comfortable while you're ignorant. Because there will be things that you do not know. Now, this kind of ignorance is different than the normal kind of ignorance that's in the second noble truth. That kind of ignorance can often be translated as delusion or denial, in the sense that it's not simply not knowing, you just don't know, but rather that what you do know is not, or it's wrong. And with this ignorance, that means that we begin to go to the point that we stop having ideas and allow real ignorance to be there. Just not sure, don't know. It's really okay for you just to not know things. But it goes against our instinct, because our instinct has to do with, if we don't know something, it might be dangerous. Fear of the unknown. I mean, this is the rise of tribalism. All of tribalism is based upon the fear of the other. We don't know them. They're not like us. There's a different color or a different religion, or their guns are made differently than ours, or I'm thinking about AK-47s now, or whatever it is. Those people are different than we are, and we don't quite understand them. Therefore, they are dangerous. And so here Achan Po is just walking around, just randomly almost, telling me, don't, I'm not sure, not sure. But that not sureness also has the quality of the invitation for investigation. And so I would say overall that that's the number one thing that Bhikkhu Buddha, that Achan Po would say to me. would just go around saying, not sure, not sure. Another one that he would use would be ta-ta-ta, which means basically in the Pali, be here now. The name of the Buddha that he gave himself was Tathagata, which means the one who is here now. So here you have Bhikkhu Ajahn Po, rather, going around saying, be here now, be here now. But he would do it at really strange times. The times that he would do it would be when he could get close to me without me knowing it. So we're standing in a group or a crowd, or there's people all around milling and piecing, passing back and forth. And then I hear just right behind my ear, ta-ta-ta. And I know that if I hear it on this ear, that I got to look over here, because that's where Ajahn Po is now, because he's just walked by me. A lot of the training that, in fact, that he gave was nonverbal at all. Another example of that nonverbal communication is that he would stand out front of the kuti that I lived in and just stand there waiting for me to figure out that I should be looking out the window to see what's there, because it's him that's just standing there. But this is what brings on a sense of feeling that something's happening, or a sense of waking up. And I do that regularly now. In fact, I've gotten to the point that I can do it with Jane. Jane is Tam's daughter, and she's the one who is now going out, because she's actually stranded here on Koh Phangan because of the transportation here in Thailand right now is closed down. So she's here on the island, cannot get back to Bangkok, and so she does the shopping. But when she's come back, I don't know when she's going to come back. But when she rounds the corner out there at the road, I know it immediately. When anyone comes onto the property, I'll know it before the dogs do. When I'm in the house, I may not be so much aware, but when I'm out on the porch, I'm very much aware of it. But the one that's the most interesting is that with Tam, when she comes home, I know it before she's in sight, before I can even see the truck, because the truck is, behind the trees and the woods and whatnot like that. And she hasn't turned the corner to come into the driveway. And still I'm watching, waiting for her. Yep, there she is. And I keep getting this positive confirmation that I know when she's coming. And I know that that was because of the training that I got from Ajahn Po, that he intentionally trained me to just start to be aware of sensory. I don't even have a good description of it. It's sort of like a knowledge or a feeling that something is happening out there and I should go look. This is also part of the serendipity. Now, many people, when they think of spiritual powers, they'll put this one in there, that they can call it clairvoyance, or the knowledge that something's happening. But it's not magic. It's something that's just real. It's a training that the mind can go through. Don't know why it is, because she's certainly not close enough for me to smell her. She's not close enough for me to hear her. She's out of sight, and yet I still know that she's there. So I don't know what senses it is that picks this up, but it's got to be real. It cannot be magical.
That is very weird, but it happens very
Pardon?
often. It's very real, but it happens very often if you notice it, if you have the composure to be present and notice it.
Yes.
But it can also happen in different types of ways. Like yesterday, I was looking at a picture of a friend and a friend's daughter. A few hours later, I meet this daughter and the mother in the street, and they are like, "Hi, how are you?" Looking concerned, and I'm fine. And they tell me that they're on the run from my friend, his family. they're on the run from him, and they're hiding from him because he hit the children. And I was just randomly looking at his picture with her, and just looking very long time. I didn't know why. Just that day, I was sitting and looking at this picture. So and then I was like, okay, you know, I help her, but so much I can. But that's not the point. The point is that why was I sitting and looking little bit longer at this picture of those two? And then I've not met them for several months. They have been hiding from this guy, from my friend, and I have not speaking to him maybe 6 months. So that was something that I don't know. What is that? Do you know?
Mm-hmm. This kind of. Go ahead, Robert.
Oh, sure. Just one quick question. It's kind of referring back to the previous topic, but I have to go in a few minutes, so I just wanted to ask the question before I have to go. But about this anxiety versus sati.
Okay.
So one example of this might be, I think it might be, say, like you're visiting a family member, and you know this family member is very judgmental, you know, and so you're anxious about seeing this family member because they might be judgmental in some way. So you notice when you're around them, and let's say they're also a gossip. Let's throw that in there too. They're judgmental and they're a gossip. And so you go to visit them and you're on alert, you know, and it's like you have a lot of sati, a lot of mindfulness because you don't want to give them stuff to chew on, you know, but it doesn't feel pleasant at all, that level of alertness, you know. Or say you go into your workplace and the workplace is toxic in one way or another. And so you're anxious, you know, you're high alert, high sati, you know, but it's negative. So how would you suggest is say the don't know, just saying, I don't know what's going to happen, you know, it's okay, you know, is that really the
Actually,
best approach?
that's correct. You see, the way that you described it is that you are already uptight and anxious because you expect things to go bad with this critical doctrine. And therefore, because you're already expecting disaster from him, that's why you're on alert. So your alertness is based upon the anxiety of the fear that something's going to go wrong. So your anxiety is actually now independent of your alertness because you could, in fact, be so full of anxiety and so, let us say, fearful of this guy that you begin to do things that under ordinary circumstances you wouldn't do. And these things are for sure going to tick him off. But we do it out of real ignorance rather than so if you're going to be uptight and anxious, be on guard and be alert is the right thing to do. However, being on guard and being alert for being careful around this guy is not the object. The alertness should be for the anxiety itself.
Mm.
Rather than trying to deal with him in an alert way, full of anxiety, the right thing to do is go to the bathroom or something, get rid of your anxiety, and then go back with the strong determination that you're not going to be uptight and anxious, but you're certainly going to be on guard with this guy. That
Sure.
the anxiety is optional.
Sure. So the anxiety is the problem, not the situation.
Right. The anxiety is the problem. In fact, the anxiety is what's created the situation. Because of your attitude. If you had the attitude, oh, he's my favorite uncle and I get so much good advice from him, if that was your attitude, so your attitude is what created your anxiety, and then your anxiety and the fear of danger, that's part of your attitude, is what's causing you then to be on high alert. the training then would be to just be on high alert because you're in charge of the situation and it's your job to be on high alert and anxiety free.
Sure.
That you don't have to have that anxiety, that you can actually, while you're talking to him and the anxiety comes up, you can begin to pay attention to that anxiety and start taking some deep breaths, breathe it in and breathe it out.
So it's interesting that you can be alert but not worried or anxious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's I think we often combine those in our mind as having to imply one or the other. If you're alert, oh, then you must be worried or anxious. But no, that's not necessary, right? Like you could be like an athlete, like a basketball player or someone like that.
Absolutely.
You
Out
know,
on the court, the basketball players have various kind of feelings, and one of the feelings that the basketball player has is extreme confidence. I've got this made. I'm going to go make that goal, and everything is good. Okay, but not all the basketball players have supreme confidence when they're out on the court. Many of them, in fact, the younger ones, will be full of anxiety. They may be, in fact, having a lot of anxiety if the other team has a bully. Then, in
sure,
fact, teams want to have at least one bully on their team just to intimidate the other team.
sure. And it's the same level of alertness, you know, regardless, right? Like,
Right.
you know, the confident player and the anxious ones are both alert, but
Hmm.
one is relaxed and alert, and the other is anxious and alert. And so the relaxed one will win because they don't have all this interference going on from their nervous system.
Generally, that's the case. This is seen in many, many cases. One example would be in the debate. You've heard about ad hominem attacks. Ad hominem attacks are not allowed in debates because if you attack your opponent, the debater himself, then that distracts him from his debate and the topic. In other words, by attacking him, making him feel bad, afraid, angry, pissed off, and any of that kind of stuff, now his feelings will interfere with his debating skills. You see
The
that with
only
politics.
type of debate where that's allowed is the presidential debate. Every other type of debate is too noble for that ad hominem attack.
Right. Well, here's a clear example of it. During the 2016 debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Donald Trump actually started stalking Hillary Clinton while she had the microphone. She was on the stage and talking and whatnot like that, and old Donald Trump comes behind her and starts fidgeting behind her, stalking her. He did that intentionally to distract her from her talking. He wanted to be the star in that particular instant, and everybody was looking at what he was doing and wondering why Hillary Clinton didn't turn around and bop him in the face with her microphone. That's what most guys would have done if Donald Trump had been in stalking, right behind most people that I know of. They would have turned around and told him to get out of my face or stepped aside or whatever like that. But Hillary was intimidated by him.
She should have given him a kiss.
That would have been better, right? She could have kissed him with her lips instead of that microphone. But the microphone, that sounds like a really good idea.
Going back to
It's a study in the suffering.
Actually, Sati will help you come out of the suffering because most of us suffer ignorantly. We don't know that we're suffering. You can see people sometimes are really angry, and you say, "Hey, man, don't be so angry." And he says, "I'm not angry," because he's denying it. He doesn't know that he's angry. So mindfulness or waking up to how you feel is absolutely essential number one point is to wake up and look at what you're doing. Wake up and look at how you feel right now. And if you feel uptight and anxious, at least now you know it. Before you were just uptight and anxious, but your mind was on whatever you were trying to do. Now you've got a recentering process and you recognize that you're full of uptight feelings. So now we can deal with that directly with the kind of thoughts that would give us good feelings rather than, oh no, what can go wrong here? The answer or a better response would be, it doesn't matter what's happening here, I can handle it. Those people, they're not going to bother me. Only I can bother me, and I'm not going to do that right now. I don't have to bother myself. Nobody makes you uptight or anxious. We do that all by ourselves. In fact, the anxiousness and that uptightness is part of the bodily sankhara. It's done ignorantly. Why do we get uptight and anxious? Because we were in the habit of getting uptight and anxious, and we got uptight and anxious when mommy was about to hit us because we were drawing on the wall when we were 3 years old. We get into these habits, and then we live with them, and we're not aware of them. But if you are aware of your uptightness, then you can do something about it. You can change the way that you're thinking and change what you're doing with the body. Normally, when we're uptight and anxious, we're also not breathing very well. And so, intentionally going back and taking long, deep breaths, and you talk yourself into being anxious. For instance, Robert, your point about the critical doctor, that you already see him as a critical doctor. That's why the anxiety is there. It's not because he's being a critical doctor in front of you. You walked up to him already anxious. He did not create your anxiety. You did that.
Sure.
Guess what? Not everyone responds to him the same way that you do.
Sure.
And more than likely, you responded to him the second time the way that you did the first time, because the second time that you dealt with him, you were expecting him to be critical because he was the first time. And so now every time you see him, you expect him to be critical and uptight with you. And so you go to him with your anxiety in the first place. It's your habit. This is a bodily sankhara that can be calmed down. You can intentionally say, the next time that I see that guy, I'm going to get myself into a really, really good state to where I'm not uptight and I'm not anxious at all, and then I'll go talk to him. I might enjoy the conversation with him finally.
Sure.
So recognize that the anxiety is optional. And that's a bodily sankhara, being uptight, being anxious, feeling anxiety, feeling a sense of doom or dread. These are all bodily sankharas. They have bodily manifestations, and they are directly related to the Sita sankharas in the sense of the emotions. So the body and the feelings are deeply tied together. Would you like to have a body that had no feelings? Would you like to have all feelings and no body? Neither
Could
one
be
of those
interesting.
things are possible. But
Either could be fun, depending. It'd be interesting to try it out.
well, that's magical thinking. The reality is that the body and the feelings are integral with each other. The way the body operates is chemical. The way that the feelings operate is chemical. They use the same chemicals.
But when you breathe good, when you breathe very deep breaths, you are able to stand very so much more pain. I have noticed a big difference my ability to sustain physical pain. Since I started with breathing exercises the whole day.
Okay. Well, in that case, what you could say is that the body has a sensation that you're calling pain, but instead of focusing on that pain and focusing on how much I hate that pain and I wish that it would go away. In fact, I call it pain because I hate it and wish it to go away. But now what we're thinking about is the breathing instead. Here, let me pay attention to the breathing, because when I'm paying attention to the painful place, I don't like it. Maybe if I can breathe myself and get myself into a good state while breathing, then I can go look at that pain while I'm feeling good, and now it's not pain, it's just a sensation. This is actually part of the Goenka technique, but I think it could be taught better than having strong determination sittings.
You
this-
On
don't
the breathing, I'm
get
sorry.
for longer.
Yeah, it's paying attention to the breathing or paying attention to something else rather than paying attention to the poor me. I hate my arm because it itches. We could just pay attention to something else.
And that also helps with anxiety breathing as well. If you take a big deep breath, it just soothes the anxiety.
It's amazing that a deep breath actually will just rid that stuff. I mean, the deep breathing itself will break up the tensions that have formed around the midsection, where the blood has all of that uh, cortisol and adrenaline in it. And so
So there are ways to breathe that make you more anxious. I mean, I guess that would be you could take shallow breaths, or like you could breathe into your chest or use your shoulders or your back to breathe as opposed to the stomach. I guess like I don't really understand all the factors.
well, that's then something to investigate, then, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
it's like what
something that
leads to a happy
so
breath.
go and investigate or play with the breath. What different breaths do I have that will cause the body to feel certain ways?
You said different breaths. Okay, yeah, so different. So what different bodily movements can you take? Like, how does that affect how you feel? That would be one way of practicing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you notice one way of breathing leads you to a more wholesome state, then that's probably a good direction to go in.
Yes, absolutely. If it feels good, do it. If it doesn't feel good, stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true physically, but it's even more true mentally.
Mm-hmm. And then having the like investigating what feels good. I guess that's going to require you to I guess like have good markers to look for. I guess like Sati and PD and things like that.
Well, we can do it that way, but we can do it in a reverse order in a sense, and instead of intentionally looking for things that we like, we can begin to just experience what is happening right here, right now, with the intention of it's okay. I could learn to
Definitely.
like
Yeah.
this too. That
Yeah,
what
like you could be like, I mean, I guess even something that you might normally associate with feeling uncomfortable, like I guess a tension in the chest, if you can sit with that with a good attitude, that's going to completely reframe it, and you'll be able to better understand like what a more wholesome breath feels like, I guess, if you're able to relax that.
hmm
Is that right? Yeah. So.
Yes, that's exactly correct. So, by observing what is, in the sense that it's okay. The first thing, in fact, that I would recommend for students is when they're practicing having these gladdening thoughts. The number one thought that you would want to have would be that everything is safe and secure.
Yeah, that's
Because
a
we
huge.
do have feelings of fear and anxiety, and that by talking ourselves, I mean, we literally are living in an environment Every one of you can look around and recognize that this environment right here, right now is safe. This is not dangerous. This house is not in imminent danger of falling over. I do not hear any sirens, so there's no police around, etc., like that. And so this is also the quality of emptiness or sunyata, is to pay attention to the fact that the things that are dangerous are not here. This place right here, right now, is empty of all dangers.
Mm.
So if this place right here, right now, is empty of all dangers, that means that I can feel secure. I can feel safe. I can feel um, safe enough that I can begin to relax.
Hmm. And
Okay.
so with
And
the, I guess like kind of what Robert was talking about, like, so there's that formation of anxiety. Is there like a clinging towards that? And then when we get into this attitude of feeling like I'm safe, that's when it's possible to like let go and let another more like wholesome formation arise.
yeah,
Um,
like that, like the uncle that he's talking about, that he can have thoughts about, I am safe with this guy. He can't touch me. I don't
mhm,
care what he says, it's not going to insult me, that only I can insult me.
mhm.
Okay, those are the kind of ways that we can talk ourselves into going into situations that we originally thought were dangerous because it was one time dangerous many years ago. But in fact, in this state, it's not dangerous. He's just an old man in a pinstripe suit standing in a room, and he might jawbone a bit, but he's not going to harm me. He's not going to hurt me. Why should I be afraid of him?
Mhm.
And so that's the kind of investigation that we do to investigate why do we have these bodily sankharas right now? Why do we have these uptight feelings when
Yeah,
there's
like
nothing
what,
to?
or what salves, or like what, I don't know. It reminds me of like the Sambo John is like, what attitude can I take on to help me be present with these feelings?
Well, first off, we've already talked about whatever those feelings are. We can breathe into them, but
Hmm.
as we're breathing into them, we're breathing into them with the thoughts or the words of, "I can relax. Just relax. Everything's going to be okay. No problems here. I can handle this situation." And then we can handle the situation with full alertness, but it doesn't have the anxiety there because we talked ourselves out of the anxiety just like we talked ourselves into it.
Yeah. Dang, thanks for that. Sorry for talking so much, everybody. But that really helps. That was a great explanation.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that this was a topic that was good for you, Clinton. Good to see you again. Also,
Yeah, it's great to see you too. It's been a while.
thanks for joining in. And this was a very good topic for us to talk about. Was bodily sankharas, of how we get uptight, how we're not watching what our hands are doing, arms akimbo. Um, and so you can see that the sitting meditation actually does have that bodily component of calming the body. Unfortunately, that's not enough for many students. They will sit there with their body still and still feel uptight and anxious or wanting things while they're sitting there rather than just relaxing. Just, everything's
Yeah.
okay.
For a long time, yeah, I feel like I would sit and just work myself into an anxious frenzy. Like I'd be focusing so much, I'd be like, oh, like there's that, be like worrying about that thing, like trying to make it go away. But that attitude kind of just breeds more of that. And it's been
Hmm.
interesting lately, kind of like thinking back on our talks and um, kind of like loosening that grip and seeing those like things like anxiety um, be able to go into the background.
Exactly, exactly so. Yeah, that you can, in fact, let go of that stuff. And keep remembering, you talked yourself into it. You talked yourself into it. You talked yourself into your anxiety. If we know that we talked ourselves into it, that means that we can talk ourselves back out of it.
It's true. Yeah, it's hard to. Yeah, definitely. That's a hard to realize sometimes, but when it clicks, it's a nice feeling.
Yeah. And so that's why we want to have wholesome thoughts, that we use unwholesome thoughts to talk ourselves into feeling bad. And the Buddha recommends let's have wholesome thoughts and talk ourselves into feeling good again. Let's gladden the mind. Let's get some joy here. Let's get some security and safety and comfort and satisfaction. Those things are
Definitely.
optional, and you can do that just by the words that you use and your attitude. And so these things work together. Right sati and right effort and right view circle around each other to build those skills. And then we add that right noble attitude. I could do this.
Hmm.
And so we do it then by talking ourselves into it. And one of the ways that we have is that right noble attitude. I could do this. This is successful. If I could do it one time, I can do it again. If
And
I
so
did it
I
twice,
guess,
I can do it 3 times.
and so those monks that you were talking about earlier, like those practices that they did, like trying to go through a crowd of people, they're having that correct attitude while they do all these like really difficult tasks,
I can wait for these people.
practicing
I
over and
don't
over.
have to push my way through to the bathroom. I can stand here and wait.
Hmm. It's almost like sitting's the most basic version of this, and like most controlled version.
hmm Well, we want to start simply. This is
Yeah.
what seclusion is all about: is getting away from it so that you have very, very few things to interrupt with your skill.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, in any music school, they have private studios. Many of them will have a piano, and many of them have nothing at all. The reason for that in the old days is because it was hard to move pianos around, but most of the other musical instruments. And so the point is that the student does not want to practice his music in the dorm because it's noisy in the dorm.
Annoying everybody, yeah.
Right, and he annoys everybody else. Okay, he does not practice his music in the dorm. He goes to the studio where it's a small room that he can close the door, and about the only thing that he can hear is the musicians in the not quite completely soundproof walls. And so that whole point then is exactly what we're trying to do here with the practice of anapanasati. Is the same thing that the music students at the university will go to a private little practice room. That in fact, that's also something that was at Goenka's place. They built a. Not only did they have the big Dhamma halls and things like that, but they had one place that it was actually shaped like a stupa, and it was circular, but it was filled with very small, tiny little cells for the students to go in there and have complete privacy while they're practicing. So this whole idea of seclusion is a major part of the teaching of the Buddha, but it's also part of our society. This is
Part,
why people have vacations, is to get away from it all. Unfortunately, when people have vacations in the West, they spend a lot of money and go to a resort and do a lot of activities. And so by the time their vacation is over, now they need a vacation from their vacation.
how
Instead
do
of,
you find seclusion, Parker? Oh, I'm sorry. I mean,
go ahead.
I was just gonna ask Parker, like, how are you able to find seclusion? Do you go on like into the woods, or do you just have a place at home that you're able to kind of get away from things? Like, I mostly just sit in my office. Like, that's something I definitely need to work on.
Well, I live with my family, but I have my own room, so it's fairly secluded right here. As long as we're not watching YouTube or anything, you can really just close your eyes and take a few breaths. Or I have a cushion over there, but more and more I've just been like, I don't even need to think about sitting on the cushion. I can just find it right here.
Awesome. Yeah, about the same for me. But yeah, but I've wanted to go into the woods for a while. Like I know you were mentioning some people doing that earlier.
Yes,
Yes, yeah.
I'm surprised. Yeah, Keyshawn right now is not on our call because he's out there in the woods. Either that or he was dinner for the bear.
Yeah, I'd definitely be worried about bears the entire time, even if there's no bears in the state.
Well, Clint, has been really good to see you again, and we've been going on for about an hour and a half. So let's finish this call. Parker, good to see you again as always,
Yes, yes.
and thanks
Both of
for
you.
catching
Great to
me
see
up
you.
on what we were talking about with the YouTube. So guys, we'll see you later. This is great. We'll do this every week.
Yeah,
Yes, we'll
talk to
see
you
you
later.
later.
Bye.